Everybody's got a price, it's the $1 million man. Podcast in demand. Understand, everybody's got a price. $1 million man. Everybody's got a price. $1 million man. Everybody's got a pod, it's the $1 million man. Podcast in demand. Understand, everybody's got a price. $1 million man. Everybody's got a price.
What's up, everybody? It's Marcus D'Angelo, and we are back for another episode of Everybody's Got a Pod. And of course, we're joined by the $1 million man himself. You know him. He's the Hall of Famer, Ted DiBiase. Ted, how you doing, brother?
I'm good, Marcus. How are you today?
Man, I'm doing fantastic. The podcast is rocking and rolling. I could not be more pleased with how things are going so far.
Good. Well, then that makes me feel like $1 million, right? Let's do it.
Well, look, you know, if you want some $1 million content, you guys have got to get over to our YouTube page at youtube.com/@everybody's-got-a-pod. We've constantly got new videos going up there. It's probably something like 2 or 3 every single day are coming up, including YouTube exclusive videos with content you will not hear on the podcast. It's only going to be on YouTube. So get over there. Plus, we did a giveaway there recently, and we have more on the way. So go now to youtube.com/@everybody's-got-a-pod. Subscribe. You'll get some awesome content, and you'll be automatically eligible for future giveaways. And Ted, today we're doing something really fun. It's a lot of folks don't know. As a matter of fact, up until like maybe a couple years ago, I didn't know that you had been in the WWF before your big run started in 1987. So this week, my friend, we are looking back to 1979 and your debut with the company. I can't wait to discuss it.
Well, yeah, I don't know. It was less than glamorous, I'll say that, but you know, it is what it is.
It was a brief run,
it was.
But man, you got to do some really cool stuff. You got to work with some really big figures, which we're going to get into. But let's start here. I mean, you were already a 4-year veteran in wrestling by the time you made it to Vince Sr.'s WWWF in '79.
Right.
And you'd recently come off a big victory for the Mid-South North American title against the legendary Fritz von Erich, which is just a huge honor to be put over by a legend like Fritz, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I don't think it was Fritz. I think it was one of his boys, wasn't it?
It's, in my research, it said Fritz, but who knows? It could be off.
I don't think I wrestled Fritz. I had it would had to have been. I mean, he's got 4 or 5 kids, and I can't remember which one, but I think it was a Von Erich. I'll put it that way.
Certainly a Von Erich. At least we've got that much. But what did you ever spend any time around Fritz?
The Dallas territory is the one territory I never got to.
Oh, really?
For whatever reason, I never got there. So
whoever you defeated for that Mid-South North American title, one of the some Von Erich, all of a sudden now, Ted, you are called up to New York, and you have the Mid-South North American title. There's some conflicting accounts about your WWF debut in the research, so I was hoping maybe you could clear it up.
Here's the thing, too. Of course, I didn't leave Mid-South with the North American title. Obviously, if you're leaving the territory, you're gonna drop that because that was their belt.
Right.
What it was when I got to New York the first time, they introduced me as the North American heavyweight champion.
Mm-hmm. And
I thought, well, okay, this is New York. They got their own. But I happened to mention to Vince Sr., I said, Vince, I said, I worked in Mid-South with Bill Watts, and I said, their champion they call their champion the North American champion. He didn't know that.
Oh.
And so the North American heavyweight title, then they had to change the name of it. And that's how the Intercontinental Championship came into existence.
Yes, down the road after Pat would defeat you for the title, but that's where the confusion came in, because I was seeing where is in your debut they named you the WWF North American champion,
right?
And so I was like, wait, he wouldn't have taken the belt with him. That didn't seem like your style. So nobody defeated you for the Mid-South one? Did you just give it back to Bill, or how did that go?
Well, no, obviously I had to, I had to drop the belt before I left the territory, and I don't remember at that time who it would have been.
Okay.
Uh, I don't know.
So that's what I find curious, and maybe you know, maybe you don't, but it's just I think it's interesting that you'd come into the territory and it's like, yeah, I was just the North American champion, and they're like, well, we'll make you our North American champion. Do you know why they would have just said, okay, let's just create a belt for Ted?
No, I don't. I mean, no, they didn't just. I don't think they created the championship. I think they had had that championship, and of course, I don't know. That might be. I don't know. That might be something to look up. Or if they just brought me in and said, okay, we're gonna call you the North American champion, and they added a new title to. Because I know for the longest time, WWF, they had a world champion, and I think they had world tag team champions.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know what else they had though.
I think that they might have just created this belt, like a secondary belt, and I'll go back and dig through the research. And by all
Yeah,
means, our listeners, if you're listening to this and you have some intel, let us know. But to my knowledge, I think that when you came in, they just said, "And here's our North American champion, Ted DiBiase," and that was like the debut of the whole thing.
wow,
So I don't
yeah,
know. I might be wrong. We'll look
yeah,
back through it, but it is really interesting.
yeah.
So I mean, you're leaving Bill Watts's territory. How was your relationship with Bill whenever you're saying, "Hey, man, I'm out"?
Oh, it was good. My relationship with Bill was always good, and and again, wrestling promoters, they know. I mean, that's why the territorial days were so good because you could go make your name for yourself in a territory. And I mean, for example, Mid South. Mid South was all of Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Mississippi. It was a big territory. Originally, I think Louisiana and Mississippi were another entity, and Arkansas and Oklahoma had always been part of the Leroy McGurk deal. That was his. But anyway, through Bill Watts coming on board, they all got connected, and so that the Mid South became a very big territory.
But so I mean, you're heading up, and it's I mean, I guess it's a competition. This is still the territories. Bill Watts, he didn't mind you going off to make a name in New York.
Well, I mean, territories are like that, though. You go to a territory, you spend some time there, and then you move on to another territory where you would, again, because of back then, I mean, all of these television shows were regional.
Hmm.
Now you turn on the TV and I guess AEW's got their time and the WWE's got their show, but it's coast to coast. Well, that wasn't the case then. I mean, I could wrestle for Bill in Mid South, and go to Georgia, and nobody ever heard of me.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, and unless you were the kind of fan that followed it in the like the wrestling magazines or something, that would be the only other way that people would know who you were, other than So you go to a new territory and you're fresh, you're brand new, and you start over. And again, I did that. I went back to Amarillo and stayed for a while, and then I went back to worked for Vince, and then I'm sorry, not Vince, Bill. I went to Georgia, and there was Terry Funk that told me. He said, Teddy, get on Georgia Championship Wrestling, get on that TV. It's the only cable television that's coast to coast, so a lot more people are going to see it because your name's in the hat.
Hmm.
For possibly being the next NWA world champion. But I think the reason that I never got it was because I kept going back to Bill, and at that time Bill was not affiliated with the NWA. So this is the NWA World Heavyweight Champion,
Right.
and so it was recognized in St. Louis and in a lot of places, but where anywhere the NWA was recognized. So
Well, you certainly had some good runs with that North American championship with Bill, and we'll be going back to revisit a lot of that here in the near future. So Bill didn't mind you taking off, and here you are in the WWF, and I mean, so it had been established as a power in pro wrestling by now, with stars like Bruno Sammartino, Bob Backlund, Pedro Morales, many others. But
and
it wasn't.
Bob Backlund was the guy who was getting the big push while I was there.
Yes, he was the champion when you were coming in the door
Yeah,
here.
right,
So yeah,
exactly.
he was getting pushed to the moon. But the company was not yet the powerhouse that it would soon become. At the time, moving from territory to territory, as you mentioned, it was pretty
Yeah,
commonplace in
yeah.
wrestling. So it makes me wonder, at the time, did you view this as like, okay, I'm going to New York, I'm going to the big time, or was it just like, okay, I'm going to a new territory?
Well, I didn't necessarily think I mean, I thought it was a big deal. I mean, because of the coverage that the New York territory always got in the wrestling magazines and what have you.
Hmm.
Uh, and but here was the deal. It's kind of like even though I played college football, and I was an athlete. I was a scholarship athlete, but I never had the great body.
Mm,
And the big, I'm telling you, the big muscled up uh, look was a big deal in New York, and I didn't
yeah.
have it. You know, I could wrestle with anybody, but when you looked at me, I looked like an athlete, but I didn't look like, well, again, like Hulk. That's about the time Hulk Hogan came in.
Yeah. And
As as,
gosh, big as
as
a house.
yeah, as a matter of fact, Hulk's first, well, his debut in Madison Square Garden was with me.
We've actually got the footage here,
Yeah.
and we're gonna watch it by the end of this episode because it happens in December of this year, and I can't wait to get your reaction to it. But as for you, Ted, you on February 13th, 1979, you make your debut in the WWF in Allentown, Pennsylvania, at a TV taping as the North American champion. And you score a pinfall victory over Mike Hall and later over Johnny Rods because it was a television taping, so you
Yeah.
get two weeks of TV out of it. Do you have any memory of your first night in with this new company?
I remember uh, it was funny. Everybody wanted to let me know. It's like Johnny Rods was he was a good hand. He was a good guy. But you better get over with him in the dressing room, or you're not going to get along with anybody. It was I don't know. Just Johnny had that rep. And if he liked you, you're in. If he didn't like you, you're out. And so there was no problem with me, and of course, like I said, I wrestled him that first go round, and we hit it off really really well.
So the idea being that Johnny Rods was like well respected in the dressing room, and if he didn't like you, he would make sure that nobody else liked you.
I don't know. Maybe.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up and kind of like the dressing room or locker room politics, because part of my notes here is I was going to mention that Roddy Piper has told the story about people messing with him when he first tried to come and work for Vince Sr., and it basically ruined his entire what would have been his first run with the company. I think he was there for one night, and I believe he was in MSG, and somebody stuffed his bagpipe with toilet paper and it wouldn't play, so he went out there and just flopped and looked like an idiot. So I mean, we hear that a lot of the time when talents arrive in a new territory,
and,
especially. Oh, go ahead.
and I was there. I saw that.
You were there for that.
Yes, I was there for that.
Yeah, what do you remember about
that's
it?
the first time I ever saw. Well, I didn't know. I mean, I didn't know anything. Except that that when he went out there, his bagpipes didn't work, and we all knew why later. But I never knew, it was, no, and nobody ever obviously confessed to doing it. But
Do you know who did it?
no, I have no idea who did it.
Rumor has it was Freddie Blassie.
You think?
That's the prevailing rumor.
Now, why? See, I don't understand why. It's kind of like, was it that he didn't make an impression on anybody, or?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you is, a lot of time when a new guy would, at least this is what we've heard, maybe you can clear it up, but a lot of time when a talent would arrive in a new territory and they're getting a nice push or getting looked at, some of the other talents would get jealous and give them some rough treatment. I mean, in your experience, did anybody give you a hard time whenever you arrived there?
No.
Nobody.
Nobody gave me a hard time, when I got there. And of course, I grew up in the business. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but my dad never, he never wrestled in New York. If you know what I'm saying, he never did New York territory. So he would, DiBiase was not a big name in New York,
right,
at that time. So I really don't know.
That's what made me think maybe somebody would mess with you, is because Mike was a big name in the Midwest and the South, but nobody knows that you're Mike DiBiase's kid when you're coming up here. You're just like some fresh faced baby face who's getting a title.
Yeah.
So, man, interesting that nobody messed with you. It's wild that you were there on that night with Roddy Piper. That story's kind of become legend. And yeah, like Roddy tells a story about like people giving him a really hard time when he was breaking in. Like, I think it was Larry the Axe Hennig, like intentionally broke his nose one night in the ring. And just like, some people were being really, really stiff with him. Good to hear that, it wasn't everybody. Maybe Roddy was just rubbing people the wrong way.
I never thought about that, but, maybe because I had the wrestling heritage, that everybody knew that my father was, in the inner circles of professional wrestling, considered one of the best,
right,
of his, not only professionally, but he was also an AAU national heavyweight amateur champion. So not only was he a great worker, he was a great shooter. And so that that maybe the respect that came along with that, and the fact that, I was a kid that came up in the business and been a part of the business had been a part of my life, that maybe that's part of the respect I got. I don't know.
Well, and I can, I'm obviously, I wasn't even born yet, so I have no details from behind the scenes, but
thanks, Marcus.
This is like 7 years before I was born. But no, it's, I mean, rumor has it that Roddy Piper could be a little bit abrasive, loudmouthed as well. So as maybe he just rubbed a few people the wrong way. Who knows?
Could be. I don't know.
Well, sure. I did want to ask though, when you're getting there, who's your kind of like point of contact? Who's guiding you when it comes to schedule, storylines, etc.?
Well, what's funny is the reason I ended up there. There was a guy, the Siboldis, Angelo, I think it's Angelo Siboldi, had been a wrestler in New York, and now he was like a producer now.
Okay.
And Mario was Angelo's son, and he came to, and I don't know where the connection was, but when Dick Murdoch and Blackjack Mulligan at one time were considering buying the Amarillo territory. Anyway, I don't know how Mario ended up in Amarillo, but he did for a short time. And so the first time I went to New York, it was because I was being pushed on television in St. Louis. And again, the St. Louis connection was really the deal. It's like Mushnick told Vince Senior uh, about me and how good I was. Well, when I showed up, you know, I was all the talent they wanted, but you know, I didn't have the body. You know, I didn't have the, you know, and so that was my setback. To be honest, that's what I feel like. Anyway, it's like, you know, I didn't have the big, massive body that everybody expected, and so it was a short run.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, you look like an athlete. We've got some clips coming up here, and you're in great shape. But you know, we've got guys like Hulk Hogan coming in. We've got the Iron Sheik, who looks like he's carved out of stone at this time. So it's just, yeah, it's, you know, it was just a weird transitional era. And speaking of transition, though, in March, the WWF is renamed the WWF, and allegedly that's at the request of Vince Jr., who is acting as an announcer for the company at the time. What were your first impressions of Vince Jr.?
Well, I didn't. There wasn't too much to be him. You know, I just knew he was the boss's son, and that he was the announcer. And you know, as far as I could see, that was it. You know,
You didn't have a ton of early interactions?
no, no,
And I guess why would you? It's just the
yeah,
announcer, you know. You're probably
yeah.
going to spend very little time around him. How about Vince Sr. though? Were you spending a lot of time talking to him?
You know, not a lot. You know, I just, I would show up and do what I was told, and that's how it worked for pretty much everybody.
Well, Ted, you'd make your Madison Square Garden debut on March 26, 1979. Howard Finkel would introduce you to the home crowd as North American champion. And man, MSG, basically home base for the WWF at this
Yeah,
time. What did you think about this? Would have been your first time in that historic venue, right?
yeah, yeah.
What'd you think of it?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, again, you know, it's Madison Square Garden. It's a building that is known to everybody nationwide as the Mecca.
Hmm.
You know, only the biggest things happen in the garden. And here I am, you know, as part of wrestling for the very first time in the garden. So I was pretty nervous. I can't even remember who I wrestled there the first time.
Gosh, I had it in the notes, and I don't know, I must have deleted it, so I don't recall.
I don't either. That's crazy.
Well, that's okay. We're on the
Crazy.
same page. I will say this though, I do know that also on the card were WWF champion Bob Backlund and the living legend Bruno Sammartino. Bruno at this time was
Yeah.
kind of wrestling pretty sparingly. He was
Yeah.
mostly on, you know, working as an announcer, but here he is. You know, it's the house that he built, and
Yeah.
he's working in front of this crowd.
Yeah.
Any memories of being around Bruno at this time?
Well, oh yeah. I mean, I got along well with Bruno, and here's the deal. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, San Martino, you know, DiBiase, you know, was it Paisan, you know, both Italian heritage, and but Bruno told me a story about my dad and an interaction that he had with my dad, and he just really respected my dad a lot, and which, you know, obviously helped me. You know, of
For
course,
sure.
I have to make my own impression, but I got along well with him. You know, yeah, he was a great guy. Um, you know, he and every bit as tough as nails, as they say.
Man, incredible story. His entire life. If you haven't heard about it, you certainly go back and research it, because Bruno, I mean, he went through some wild stuff through his childhood, and just, I mean,
Yeah,
a true American dream coming to reality. And you know, at one point, it was him and Muhammad Ali. I can't remember who was number one, but they were the two highest paid athletes on the face of the planet in
hmm
like the 60s. So it says a lot about him.
hmm
Uh, Bob Backlund, as we mentioned, champion at this time. And I've heard that he's quite a character. What did you think of Bob, and how did you feel about him as the flag bearer for the company?
uh, personally, I liked Bob. He was just a different guy,
Yeah.
just a different kind of guy. And again, he was a legit in terms of his athleticism. You know, here's a guy. You know, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. It's hard for me to explain. Uh, he was. I mean, he was a legit. I mean, amateur.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he had all the credentials, but I don't know. He didn't come across that way. He didn't come across as a tough guy. I don't know.
Well, and you know, kind of the criticism I've heard when it comes to Bob is like, yep, a legit athlete. He just didn't look like a legit athlete. Like he just looked like a
Yeah,
guy. And so
yeah.
yeah, that's I
Yeah,
think that was everybody's problem.
I guess that's the best way to describe it. You know, he didn't. You know, he looked like a nice guy.
Right, right. And I mean, we're coming off the era of like Bruno Sammartino and superstar Billy Graham and these just big, muscly, you know, guys. And then it's just like here's hometown boy looking Bob Backlund, just kind of a weird fit in that role.
But I mean, Backlund. You know, Backlund's. You know, he didn't have a great body. I think he had a better body than I did at the time.
I mean, he was in good shape, to be
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, he's in good shape. But I don't know. It's just strange.
It was a weird transition era at this time. And Ted, you're coming in the door, and the company appears to have started, or rather, your schedule with the company appears to have started slow, according to the research that I'm doing, with a formula that looks like it's 2 nights working TV tapings, 2 matches each night, and then something like 3 weeks off. That does not appear to last very long, though, as before you know it, you're off to the races in a big way. It looks like, generally speaking, you're working something like 6 days a week, but it varies. I'm
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
I'm going to be doing a lot of jumping around here to cover all the
yeah.
highlights of your time with the company. But let me just assure everybody, you are working a lot during your time in the WWF. What can you tell us about your schedule?
Well, I mean, it was like that. It was, you know, they did their TVs. You know, I think they said was it every 3 weeks?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that would be back-to-back days.
Yes.
3 shows on one day and 3 shows the next day. And out of those, I mean, you know, you could, you know, you might be on all of them. You might be on. It just depends on what they were doing. But those were a couple of tough days. But then, yeah, everything else, you're working at least 6 days a week. You know.
Yeah, by the time you got rolling, man, it's you can look at all this up on the history of WWE.com. They've got all the dates and the matches, the victories, losses, etc. And just going through it, it's, you know, I think there was like more than 200, probably closer to 300 matches during your run here. It was somewhere in that neighborhood. So
Well,
just
yeah, I mean, that's like, you know, you stay there almost a year, and yeah, it's every day. I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, territorial wrestling was that way. I mean, when I went to work for Bill Watts, there were no days off. You know, you might get Christmas off, and then when they figured out that people wanted to go out after they opened their presents and do something, and that they could fill a building on Christmas night, you didn't have Christmas off anymore.
oh man.
That's a fact. I wrestled many Christmas nights. You know,
It's asking a lot of people, you know, and especially if you're trying to build a family,
yeah, yeah,
man.
and
Just
especially and if you're one of the top guys, you know, especially if you're one of the top guys, then you're one of the guys that everybody else is depending on to draw the house.
yes.
And so, you know, you might as well forget about having had a day off.
In the middle of all this, you're getting some mic work, and here you are with a very young Vince Jr. in May 1979, which is going to be our first clip this week.
In the meantime, it will be on the one side, Ted DiBiase, who will defend the North American heavyweight title against handsome Jimmy Valiant. And with that in mind, let's bring on Mr. DiBiase now to discuss your title defense in Philadelphia. I know it gives you a great deal of pleasure to appear at the Spectrum.
Well, it certainly does, Vince. This will be my second appearance at the Spectrum. And the first time I was here, the people accepted me very well. I got one victory under my belt, and I might add that victory was over yet another Valiant brother in Jerry Valiant. And so tonight I'm going to go out and try to defend the North American heavyweight title against Jimmy Valiant. Now, having already been in the ring with one, I've got a basic idea as to their style, but each man is an individual, so I'm going to have to cope with just a little bit different style of wrestler in Jimmy Valiant. But I also, in the back of my mind, know that where there's one, there's two, and possibly three. I've got a victory over one, so I'm going to have to be looking out for the others.
Thank you very much. Ted DiBiase.
So a brief little promo there, but man, it was cool to see young Ted alongside young Vince. Man, what a cool throwback! And you guys mentioned it there. You know, you're working with the Valiant brothers, who are being managed by Captain Lou Albano. You're also working with Bulldog Brower, who's being managed by Albano. So a lot of experience here with some pretty unique figures in wrestling. Ted, do you have any Lou Albano stories?
I wish I did. I mean, I just remember Lou as, I mean, he was a great guy, but man, he would entertain the dressing room. I can guarantee you that. There are a lot of stories, and I just wish I could remember one. But Captain Lou. You never knew what to expect.
Man, it's you talk about a guy that was like built for wrestling. I mentioned on my podcast a lot. People compare wrestling to a pirate ship. Well, he looked the part. He had that pirate vibe.
Oh gosh, yeah. And he was. I mean, he was always on. Whether he was out in front of the crowd or entertaining the boys in the dressing room.
Man, what a character!
What a character! What a character! Yeah.
Well, so that promo reminded me, I couldn't put my finger on it the first time I saw it, and then all of a sudden it hit me. That promo was very much like a Bret Hart style promo, where it's like, it's nothing flashy, it's right to the point, you get the message across, and that's the end of the promo. And then, of course, you come to be known for like your really over the top, energetic type promos.
Well, that started later, when I went back to Mid-South, and when I turned heel. I think it was when I turned heel is when all that turned on. Because in the inner circles of wrestling, at least at that time, the guy that's running the show, the guy that's calling the match, is the heel.
Mm-hmm.
He's the leader out there in the match, and if you, and that's just the way it was. And eventually I got to a place where, Bill Watts thought I was capable of doing it, and that first time I ever became a heel was for him.
It's interesting looking back now, because looking at you, I can see why they wanted to position you as a baby face here in the WWF, because you're a handsome kid, you're tall, you got great hair. It's like, hey, that looks like a baby face, but yeah, really,
and it was a baby face. I mean, oh my gosh, I just looking at that now, I'm like, shoot, man, I look like I'm 18.
You look like a kid, which we'll share the clip online on our social media at Ted DiBiase Pod on all platforms. So check it out. But man, it's all of a sudden you became a heel, and you were off to the races in a hell of a great way. At this time, I'm wondering, are you under contract, or is it more of like a handshake arrangement?
Back then,
Mm-hmm.
it was a handshake. Nobody signed contracts back then. I mean, the territories were the territories, and you would just when you were ready to leave, you would just go to the boss and give him your 2-week notice. Say, I'm out of here. And obviously, before you do that, you obviously talk to somebody else and secured you a position in another territory.
Man, a whole other world back then, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Now, you don't have to reveal any exact figures, Ted, but were you making better money than in previous years at this time?
Well, I mean, the trip to New York was, I would say the pay was a bit better there. I mean, obviously everything was, but it was all, it's kind of like like it's always been. I mean, the cost of living in Baton Rouge, the cost of living in Shreveport, or the cost of living in Amarillo was not as much as it was in New York.
Right.
I mean, oh my gosh, so you know, you had to be paid more to survive. I mean, just to live in New York. And I think I had an apartment while I was there. Well, wait, no, yeah, I had an apartment in Parsippany, which is just across the river in Parsippany, New Jersey.
So you've got this apartment up in New York, and man, we mentioned it. You're this fresh faced kid. All of a sudden, you're in the big city. Did you enjoy your stay up to this point, or just too much of a different world?
It was a different world. I mean, it was definitely a different world, and you know, and you know, learning my way around. Oh my gosh, you know, I can remember the first time that I had to drive from Parsippany out to somewhere, one of the boroughs. It, it was in Jersey. I can't remember it, but it was one of the big markets. Anyway,
like Newark.
I got no, that wasn't Newark, because I was really close to Newark. Parsippany was, but I literally was given directions to go into Manhattan and then go out through one of the other, you know, interests, you know, like I came through the Lincoln Tunnel. That's how I got into Manhattan, but out of Manhattan, I went another way to get out to where I was going. Dang it, I can't remember where it was.
but just trying to make your way around.
Yeah, that was, oh my gosh, just, yeah, especially for somebody who, now I was used to traveling, but not trying, you know, that's just
you were
crazy.
traveling with like Dick Murdoch on country roads, though. This is this is a whole other thing.
Oh gosh, it was crazy. Yeah, and you would have to leave. You know, you always had to leave early because you're going to be dealing with traffic and all that. It was a headache, man. It really was.
I believe it, man. I've had to drive in New York City a couple times, and I don't care to repeat the experience.
No, thank you.
So, well, we are on to one of the biggest events from your first run, the WWF, and that's a match with the legendary Pat Patterson. With your North American title on the line, you were the babyface, Pat was the heel, and we've got the final moments of the match right now.
Patterson still favoring that left arm and shoulder, trying to shake it loose.
But unfortunately, you know, he's such a ring-wise as Patterson with his evil ways that he outsmarted DiBiase and sidestep and hit him in the back, making him go outside the ring. And since then, he has been booting him, doing this and that, and he's gotten his arm pretty well recuperated, unless DiBiase does something to it now.
Oh my, things turning around. Patterson rolling in. And DiBiase, look at this man with what fire he has.
That babyface fire.
Patterson off the rope. Quick body drop. Oh no. It appeared to me there, you think Patterson intentionally shoved DiBiase into the referee?
He did, and the referee's knocked out right now, and I don't know, let's see what's going to happen now, because there's no referee really in the ring, you might say.
Patterson going down in the tights. Patterson has something around his, what is that?
Breast knuckles, man. He's got something like breast knuckles. And wow.
Patterson waylays Ted DiBiase. Patterson lifting high in the air the North American heavyweight title. We anxiously await this ring announcement.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is the time. 9 minutes and 15 seconds, and the winner, the new North American heavyweight champion, Pat Patterson.
Well, there it was, Ted. Pat cheats with those brass knucks, and your run as the WWF North American Champion is over. And you mentioned it. Following this, Pat would win a fictional tournament in Rio de Janeiro, and the North American title will be replaced by the newly invented Intercontinental Championship, which we still see today. Pat Patterson, just a brilliant mind behind the scenes in WWE. And he go on to have a long career booking amazing finishes that fans of the 80s and 90s still talk about today. And he even invented the Royal Rumble concept. He would also, Ted, go on to become the first ever openly gay performer in wrestling history. So, I mean, just an icon. Do you have any memories of working with Pat?
Oh, gosh, yeah. I mean, it's like if I had my choice of someone to work with, if I could pick somebody, Pat Patterson was great. I mean, he was great in the ring. He was great out of the ring. You know, he was tag team partners with
Ray Stevens.
And Ray Stevens is another guy who was an unbelievable worker, just unbelievable. And them as a team was just actually me and Tito Santana. Now Tito Santana, Tito and I, we both went to New York together the first time.
Yeah,
Tito stayed. He met his wife there, and he stayed longer than I did. And of course, you know, Tito had a better body, and I get it, you know. But we got to work with them in Amarillo as a team. Me and Tito wrestled the two of them in a tag team match in Amarillo. It was unbelievable.
How about that?
But if ever I had a question, the whole time I was wrestling in the WWF, and when I went back, you know, if I had an issue or I had a problem, if there was a question I had or something I needed to know, if Pat Patterson was there, he's always the guy I went to. Always.
Man, that says an awful lot.
I mean, I had that much respect for his knowledge of our business. It's incredible. And I even think, I mean, Vince Jr. would tell you that now. Because Pat was Vince's right-hand man for a long time. And God bless him, you know.
Everybody says the greatest finish guy in the history of wrestling. Pat could always come up with the right finish for a match.
Yeah, he was. He was great.
Following this, you continue teaming with Dominic DeNucci against the Valiants. You'd work more with Greg Valentine. You'd lose a few more matches to Pat Patterson, whether by pinfall or count out, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But Dominic DeNucci, kind of an old timer by this point in his career, and it wouldn't be long before he'd be a trainer here in Pittsburgh for the likes of Mick Foley and Shane Douglas. Would you say that you learned a lot from Dominic DeNucci as your tag team partner?
You know, Dominic was great. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much. I mean, I don't know if I did a lot of tagging with Dominic, but he was good. You know, I mean, he was in the position he was in because he was good.
Yeah. Well, I know that he was formerly tag team partners with Bruno, and just kind of like one of those guys, just a seasoned veteran. So cool that you're getting the opportunity to work with some of these, you know, stars from the prior generation. But here coming up, you're about to work with a star of, a guy who was about to be a big star during your generation. By late July, you're back in MSG working against Hussein Arab, who would soon be known the world over as the Iron Sheik. You'd win a draw in the Garden, and the two of you would work together on and off and into the fall, swapping victories along the way. The match that you referenced on our last episode would have been Pittsburgh, November 30th, 1979 at the Civic Arena, where apparently he wanted to put you over due to the crowd reaction, but he would score the pinfall.
It was he was a great guy. I mean, you know, you know, like the crowd was like up. I mean, like, you know, people come up and pounding on the mat and stuff like that. And, you know, he just kind of whispered in my ear. He says, "Hey, brother, I don't think I beat you tonight." I said, "No, Shiki, baby, we got to do what we've been told. So let's do it."
Yeah. Well, Ted, that brings us to our main event, so to speak, here for this podcast. It's December 17th, 1979. It's Madison Square Garden, and it would mark your final appearance with the WWF for nearly 8 years. It would mark Hulk Hogan's MSG debut. It's a real piece of wrestling history, and we've got the final moments of it here for our final clip.
Hogan, this is what the elbow. DiBiase, some kind of hard, a left hand and right, a quick grab, another one. DiBiase pouring it on Hogan. Hogan, whip to the ropes, cut it off, drop, kick out. Another one. Hogan reeled to the buckle. DiBiase coming in with a shoulder block. Hogan reeled to the far corner. Here he goes again. Oh, my. Hogan displaying not only strength as we have seen in the outset or all the way through the match, actually, but a moment ago displaying quite a bit of agility. DiBiase back to his feet, but just barely. Hogan scoops him up, uses his knee. And Hogan keeps toying around with Ted DiBiase. Now he has him in a bear hug. And it could be over. It's over. So, the fabulous Hulk Hogan, victorious in his very first appearance here in Madison Square Garden. A hard-fought battle all the way with Ted DiBiase, who unquestionably showed tonight this capacity crowd. He's one of the great competitors, there's no doubt about it.
Well, there was, Ted. Your final match with the company and Hogan's first match in MSG, which is, I mean, pretty historically significant here.
Yeah.
What do you remember about this night at the Garden?
Well, just I tell you the thing that impressed me with Hulkster was after the match is he thanked me over and over, and he said this. He says, "I owe you one." And so years later, he stays and he becomes Hulk Hogan. I mean, a bigger star than anybody ever saw coming.
Mm-hmm.
And then, when I did go back, after Vince Jr. had taken the helm of the ship and everything, and I was now on the road again with the company. The first time I saw the Hulkster, I think it was an outdoor event somewhere, and he walked up, smiled, and shook my hand, and he said, "It's payback time."
All right.
And I was like, wow. So
he didn't forget.
Yeah, he didn't forget. And the rest is history. So
man, and yeah, you wound up getting to have a hell of a nice run with Hogan, and as a top heel in the company, which is saying an awful lot.
Yeah.
Well, we heard at the end of that clip too, Ted, where Vince said, Ted DiBiase's proved that he's a great competitor, but then you're just gone. So it makes me wonder, did Vince try to convince you to hang around?
No, I don't think so. Not at that time.
So what prompted you leaving the territory?
I just think it was time to go. It was like, my first wife was not very happy. And that's why the stay in New York didn't last very long either. And that was, I got married. I mean, the first time, I was stupid. I'll be honest. And it's like, I was so young. I mean, and the girl that I married was somebody that I had known from when I was living in Amarillo, with my dad right before he died during that time. And when I went back to school there, I ran into her. She was working at a store, and so we went out. It was kind of a nostalgia thing. Like, this is a connection to my past, and so we started dating, got married, and like, being a wrestler's wife is not an easy. It's not easy.
No.
Living with somebody who's gone all the time. I mean, and that was a sad thing too. And I get it now. I mean, it's like, I take her to New York. She doesn't know anybody there. Okay, she doesn't know anybody there. It's like, and the other wrestlers and their wives, nobody else lived close by. So when I left every day, she's there in an apartment by herself.
That's asking a lot of somebody.
Oh yeah, and so, and then when I left New York, I went back to work for Bill, and we moved to an apartment there, and it was kind of like, I could see she was starting to, like, drink more.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of like, then I decided, I said, okay, look, we're going to do this. This will be easier. I took her back to Amarillo, and I said, and we're going to try to make this thing work, but it didn't. It just, well, we both knew, and that was it.
It's just interesting,
Yeah,
it's
it was,
pretty hot and heavy with the company here, and you had that run with their first North American title, and all these great things happening, and then it's just suddenly you're gone. So I guess it's just the nature of the territory days. Guys would just kind of come and go.
Yeah, yeah, and and again, I was like, I was a great hand, but I was not a great body.
Right.
And that became a bigger deal.
You saw like the writing on the wall.
Well, yeah, and even though I played college football, I mean, I was 6'4", and I was just now I'm looking at myself going, wow, I do look like a string bean. So,
well,
it took me a while to mature.
Cool to look back and see, how all the pieces finally fell together, and and to your point, you went back to Bill Watts' territory. He turned you into a heel, and that's where you really found your footing. And man, next thing you know, you're going to be one of the biggest heels in pro wrestling. Ted, this episode was an absolute blast today.
Thanks, man.
We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, we'd love to have you follow us on social media at Ted DiBiase Pod on all social media platforms. Follow Ted at MDM Ted DiBiase on his social media, and follow me at Marcus P. D'Angelo on Twitter. Also, please follow Premier Streaming Network at Watch on Premier on Twitter, and at Premier Streaming Network on Instagram and Facebook. Again, if you would like to get this podcast on video with no commercials and get an access to a ton of sports and entertainment, other shows, etc., get over to premierstreamingnetwork.com, sign up for Premier Plus, and I can guarantee that you're going to enjoy it if you're a wrestling fan. And Ted, I really enjoyed this episode. It was great looking back at a time frame that it just doesn't get talked about very much.
Yeah, you're right. It's kind of like, it was, it was kind of like the in-between. It's like I had the start of my career and everything that was associated with that, and my initial encounters and working with it for Bill Watts, and I look back at the people that I worked with.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the talent that I was exposed to was unbelievable.
Amazing.
It is. I mean, which all helped me become a better worker, and then go back to Amarillo, and again, the Funks, and again, all the talent that they brought, that and then and so that made the second trip to New York a whole lot better.
Man, it's less than a year, but really you could argue that this was a really crucial period of time in your development.
Yeah, it was.
Man, fun to revisit it, and we'll be back here next week with some fresh content, right, Ted?
You got it. And remember, Everybody's got a price for the $1 Million Man.
We'll catch you guys next week right here on Everybody's Got a Pod.